on measuring privacy. A major concern in data science is preserving privacy. When using data relating to individual people, often referred to as data subjects, we want to take active steps to ensure that the information that we hold about them isn't accidentally or maliciously revealed in the summary statistics that we publish or the models that we build using their data. There are threats to privacy throughout the life cycle of data science or a machine learning project. The data gathering stage might present issues where privacy could become compromised as information is collected from data subjects and processed into a usable format. Privacy might also be compromised during data storage. For example, during an internal privacy breach, private information remains with the data holder, but unauthorized staff might access that private information. An external breach of data privacy might happen through something like accidental data leakage, deliberate data leakage, or through more legitimate means, such as through a court order, for example. Finally, the outputs or models themselves might reveal personal information about the individuals used to train those models or to create the summary statistics. So as data scientists, our aim then is to be able to conduct useful analyses and construct accurate models, while also balancing these goals against the risk of disclosing purposefully or otherwise the personal information of our data subjects. Fung et al. Provide a review of privacy-preserving data publishing methods. We'll introduce and discuss a few of these techniques for privacy preservation, which they classify broadly as suppression, aggregation, obfuscation, and pseudonymization. These techniques can be applied to a wide variety of data types and data structures. Here we're going to focus on tabular data and assume that it's in tidy format, so that each row corresponds to a data subject and each column corresponds to a measured value. Regardless of the data structure though, these privacy-preserving methods can be applied over data subjects, which would correspond to rows in tabular data, or measured values, which would be the columns of our tabular data. So here we have a small example of a demographic data set in tidy format, where each row is corresponding to a data subject and each column is corresponding to a measured variable or attribute. Within our dataset, we can classify our measured values according to their level of sensitivity and qualitatively the amount of privacy that they would threaten if they were to be revealed. The most privacy-threatening variables within a dataset are known as identifiers. These are going to be measured values which on their own uniquely reveal the identity of an individual within that dataset. We might use names, student ID numbers, customer numbers, email addresses, or passport numbers as examples of identifying variables. By definition, publishing an identifier will reveal whether or not an individual person is within that dataset. Quasi-identifiers don't on their own specify an individual as belonging to or being excluded from a dataset. However, quasi-identifiers can occur in unique combinations which allow the re-identification or de-anonymization of individuals within that dataset. For example, there are many 56-year-old men in the UK, and there are many people who live in each postcode area. However, the combination of these might reveal the identity of a data subject. The risk of this happening is going to depend on the number of quasi-identifiers that were being collected and the values that they take, as well as the abundance of each response in the target population. So, for example, if there are many residents within the postcode, or the area happens to have an unusually homogeneous group of residents, then this re-identification risk is reduced. Finally, we have sensitive attributes. These are the variables within our dataset that the data subjects do not wish to be revealed. What might be considered a sensitive attribute is going to depend on the context in which that information is gathered and stored. And some examples of sensitive attributes might be things like a medical diagnosis, religion, internet search history, or bank account balance. Sensitive attributes are often conflated with the target variable of a study, and this is because in many settings, the two actually coincide. So in areas like medicine or sociology, this often happens, but it's not always the case. So for example, in a computer-aided medical diagnosis, the target variable is the diagnosis itself, and so is likely going to be a sensitive attribute. However, it's not necessarily the only sensitive attribute within that dataset. Some or all of the predictors that are being used might also be considered as sensitive attributes, particularly if they're relating to other aspects of that patient's medical history. On the other hand, we could have sensitive attributes within our predictor set, but be using those to predict a non-sensitive target variable. Sensitive attributes are also commonly conflated with protected characteristics. These are overlapping but distinct concepts. Sensitive attributes are variables that an individual data subject has a desire or legal right to not be revealed to any third party. Protected characteristics, on the other hand, are variables which cannot legally be used as predictors within a model without legitimate cause. So in the UK, at the time of writing at least, the variables shown on the screen here are all protected characteristics. So age is a protected characteristic that might legitimately be used when calculating life insurance premiums, but not when using software to filter job applications, for example. Attributes which are afforded legal protections are in many contexts going to be considered sensitive attributes, but this isn't always the case, and many non-protected attributes are commonly considered to be sensitive anyway. So this issue that we've briefly touched on about quasi-identifiers occurring in unique combinations was brought notably to the attention of the media by researcher Latanya Sweeney. As part of her work on researching data privacy, Sweeney bought a list of voters in Cambridge, Massachusetts. For only $20, this list gave her the name, address, zip code, date of birth, and gender of each registered voter. Of the almost 55,000 registered voters, 97% of those could be uniquely identified using only their date of birth and zip code. Sweeney later extended this study to consider the entire population of the United States of America and estimated that by including gender as a third quasi-identifier, 87% of the US population could be uniquely identified. This study really emphasizes that removing explicit identifiers is not going to be sufficient to protect the privacy of data subjects. Particularly when working with high-dimensional data, there's going to be a risk of this form of re-identification attack happening because we've got so many variables being recorded. Sweeney also realized a common weakness in privacy studies, and this was treating datasets in isolation. The governor of Massachusetts at that time, Governor William Weld, was associated with a push towards publishing anonymized medical records so that they could be used in research to improve healthcare within the state. By cross-referencing those anonymized medical abstracts against the voter register she'd purchased, Sweeney was able to uniquely identify Governor Weld's supposedly anonymized medical record. This is an example of an external data attack, which tries to which tries to compromise privacy by cross-referencing one data source against another publicly available or purchasable dataset. So this story does serve as a powerful example, but the choice of data subject here plays largely in the favour of the de-anonymizer. Weld's role as a public official meant that he was almost certainly a registered voter, which is definitely not the case for every resident in his hometown of Cambridge. Later analyses of the medical and voter records revealed that the incompleteness within the voter register and missing values within it meant that almost half the population couldn't have been re-identified by such an external data attack. So this leads us naturally then to consider how we might measure or improve privacy of data subjects, and whether we should be considering privacy in terms of an average data subject, the most protected individuals, or those most at risk.